Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quarantine Collective's ongoing reading of Anti-Oedipus. We are in chapter 4.7642.378-G as we slowly make our way through the end of this fucking book. So ultimately, mostly because I'm really looking forward to starting it again. We're just going to dive in because this is going to be a really fun one, and there's a lot sort of going on here. There's a lot happening today with this reading. And I'm not in the mood to distract myself by trying to get into discussions about other things. So, I hope everyone's well. I hope everything's going well. And we're going to go ahead and make our way into the reading itself. Let's see. Bingo. We are at, not 3S9. That's terrible. That's terrible. This PDF. I need to get a better PDF. But it's 359. We are in the middle of 359, and we've been making our way through the second positive task of schizoanalysis. And I know at this point it seems like I keep going over this every week, and it's a lot of repetition, but there's a reason for that. It's because as we read, even if we only get through 1, 2, 3, or 4 paragraphs, it's important to have the baseline of what exactly we're going through here, what they're aiming at, and what they're setting for. Because the goal of this section is to set up what schizoanalysis is. Primarily, they do this through contrasting it to psychoanalysis. And so there's a lot of terminology in here that really is about sort of throwing forward, oh, look, psychoanalysis does this. Well, what about this? Here's this. And basically compare and contrast, over and over and over. The tasks, the audio is cracking still. God damn it. Is the audio cracking for people in Discord?
Yes, slightly. Maybe.
All right, give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to reboot the audio interface. 1 sec.
I just did again. Maybe every minute.
Okay, good. Let me know if it cracks again. Me. Works for me. Works for everyone. Sounds better. Hopefully. As we make our way. Oh no, it's a microphone issue. My audio interface I have to reboot due to system interrupts because of how AMD's very complex processor handles MSI, which is a whole nightmare. And I'm not in the mood to deal with it. So we're just rebooting now. The tasks of schizoanalysis function very, very simply. The first is the, you might say, destructive task of schizoanalysis. And this is where basically as you're going through the process, and task 1's destructive goes with task 2's positive. It's about breaking down the nature of symbolic narrative. As the representational space is something that your analyst and patient, whatever, or you, I mean, it's not really, it's fine, just in general. As that space is being broken down, where it's breaking down the narrative itself, which is, again, psychoanalysis does, but psychoanalysis tries to break it down to ultimately push towards. 1 sec. Violet, you okay? Not me? Okay. I want mom, not you. As she screams bloody murder. Psychoanalysis also wants to break down these larger narrative things. Oh God, I'm having so much stress at this, and this. What psychoanalysis does is breaks these down and gets you to talk about symbolic elements at a base level by making everything relate back to mommy, daddy, me. Oh yes, well tell me about your father, tell me about your mother. What's your relationship here? What's your relationship there? Let's simplify so you can understand these things via these other symbolic. We're not doing that. It's the same general process of breaking down happens, but with this, it's breaking down entirely and instead keeping an eye on keeping aware of the indices that these things are pushing, thinking of it almost as attractive repulsion setups, almost as if there's magnetic forces. Where's the attraction? Where's the things happening as this moves back and forth? With this setup, as you do this, you make your way into the sort of second step, which is being keenly aware that this is not just simply a nature of, oh, the person is singularly attracted or repulsed. No. That there is a combination of things working in a person's psyche, that there is the unconscious investments, which are the attractions and repulsions towards, you might say, large-scale sort of things, just anything, just basically anything, attractions and repulsions. But that's married with where a person understands they are socially, their preconscious interests, how they, before they they fully exist, or before they're intellectualizing, the places they believe they are socially. And this varies and changes and will change all the time. But understanding that the way a person is made is through this process of this flowing into the next. As we make our way through this, and they're making their way through sort of this last bit, they're going through and really breaking down what it means for people to be socially aware, for people to be aware of where they're at socially, where they're attracted and repulsed, how these things work, and how a person sort of comes out of it. Because it's never just as simple as saying, oh, they are neurotic because they have a poor overall relationship with their parents. Oh, they are psychotic because the father wasn't around. Oh, they are a pervert because mom never properly taught them how to hold off on their own enjoyment, whatever it may be. It's never quite that simple. So, as we make our way through this, keep an eye on these types of turns as they're making these critiques and pushing in this general direction and making their sort of critique live. If that makes sense to everyone, let me know, and I'm happy to sort of kick forward in that. Generally speaking. All right. I should have the page generally shared. We're going to make our way through it, and we're going to do what we can. Let me know as we go if you have any questions. There's a lot here. There is a lot here that's going to be said. So I'm going to do my best, and I do try to preface it every time. I am not a psychoanalyst, nor am I formally trained. You know what? Just don't listen to me. Use me as a board for you to jump off of. Consider me a fucking useless bag of shit, but as long as it makes you go look up real things, I don't really care. So I'm going to make my way through and we'll see what we do. Since the 19th century, the study of mental illnesses and madness has remained the prisoner of the familial postulate and its correlates, the personological correlate and the egoic postulate. The postulate moic. It's egoic postulate's really fascinating. I'll come back to that. But it's very much centered around moi. We have seen, following Foucault, how 19th century psychiatry had conceived of the family as both cause and judge of the illness, and the closed asylum as an artificial family charged with internalizing guilt and with instituting responsibility, enveloping madness no less than its cure in a father-child relationship everywhere present. In this respect, far from breaking with psychiatry, psychoanalysis transported its requirements outside the asylum walls, and first imposed a certain free, intensive, phantasmal use of the family that seemed particularly suited to what was isolated as the neuroses. But the resistance of the psychoses on the one hand, and the necessity for taking into account a social etiology on the other hand, has led psychiatrists and psychoanalysts to redeploy under open conditions the order of an extended family, which is still believed to possess the secret of the illness as well as its cure. After the family has been internalized in Oedipus, Oedipus is externalized in the symbolic order, in the institutional order, in the community order, the sectorial order, etc. This progression contains a constant of all modern attempts at reform. And if this tendency appears, in its most naive form in community psychiatry aimed at adjustment, the therapeutic return to the family, to the identity of persons and the integrity of the ego, the whole works being blessed by successful castration in a sacred triangular form. The same tendency is in more disguised forms is at work in other trends. It is not by chance that Lacan's symbolic order has been diverted, utilized for grounding a structural Oedipus applicable to psychosis, and for extending the familial coordinates beyond their real and even imaginary domain. It is not by chance that institutional analysis has difficulty in maintaining a position against the reconstitution of artificial families where the symbolic order, embodied in the institution, reforms group Oedipuses with all the lethal characteristics of the subjugated groups. Good Lord. There's a lot in here, and there's a lot of, this is about as jargony as it gets. It's a really annoying paragraph, to be frank. But it's extremely jargony. We're going to have to make our way through it, so I hope you guys are patient and ready. Good Lord. Since the 19th century, the study of mental illness and madness has remained the prisoner of the familial postulate and its correlates, the personological correlate and the egoic postulate. There is a ideological assumption that has sort of dominated the way we've considered mental health, psychiatric thought, psychoanalytic thought for, at this point, over a century, but I get to say 2 centuries almost. And that the family, and this is a thing you still see today very much. Again, this is not, I think, you've been reading too much psychoanalysis when the paragraph doesn't seem complicated. No shit. We think of the family as the place that a person is made and forged, and that they're made healthy in this way. Now, as a parent, you have it drilled into your head. You'll be told by teachers, doctors, grandparents, family, anyone, your job is to right that person for society. Your job is to set them up for success. You make that child. You're told this over and over and over. But it's not just that. We also spend a huge amount of time thinking of this from the perspective of seeing an adult and going, wow, they must have daddy issues, mommy issues, whatever it is. The first framework we have, the fundamental unit of persons as mommy, daddy, me, and having me, everyone's me, be that thing. Even when I say it now, it feels weird to even say out loud, like mommy, daddy, me. I'm speaking externally. I'm speaking about you using this, everyone using this, but I'm using the term me because it always comes back to this realization of this sort of perspectivist mommy, daddy, me setup. And the way that this has happened, this is pulling a little bit from, Foucault's, oh my God. What's fucking, God damn it, Brooks. Foucault wrote a lovely book on madness that I highly suggest, and my brain isn't working very well right now. Doesn't matter.
Madness and Civilization.
Thank you. Madness and Civilization. And History of Madness. Like in general, Deleuze is pulling from that in just this early part. It's like the first thing that is set up here that he's saying is that it's ego-centered psychology. It's always about this person as the thing that needs to be fixed, as the thing we need to work with. And it's primarily explained what this person's doing via family. And the family is only explained as these symbolic person units. It's not even contingent about, oh, when you were young, your father worked in factories and you barely saw him. It's not about the reality of that entire social reality that the kid had to deal with, but just the dad. The person is the fundamental unit, not the events, not the way he was handled, not what he had to go with in his life. It's always the person. So this is what we do. And this is, again, the first line sets up what their kind of their point they're making the entire time. Psychoanalysis sets up the family as the entire explanation. Within that family, the symbolic persons, mommy, daddy, me, brother doesn't even matter except as competition for mommy, daddy, me, and that me, I, ego, moi, is the center of all of it. These three postulates are the core of psychoanalytic thought. And he goes on. We have seen, following Foucault, just again, how 19th century psychiatry conceived of the family as both cause and judge of the illness, the closed asylum as an artificial family charged with internalizing guilt, instituting responsibility, enveloping madness no less than its cure in a father-child relationship everywhere present. It reads better in French. Just this sentence sucks in English. This sentence is very, for me, maybe other people find it better. I hate this sentence. But that's the phrasing he's coming on here is that because the family is established as this explanatory principle, everyone is set up by the family. In turn, they set up the mental health care system as family, sort of like an extracted version of the family or an exceptional version of the family. And this setup that then we are doing at that point, which ain't great, and this larger thing becomes sort of the surrogate family that imposes the moral structure that the bourgeois and the power structure have externally. Again, this is Foucault. This is Foucault. This is like good, interesting, good Foucault. I think good Foucault. Please.
Foucault recalling in the 17th century in Madness and Civilization, where families were introduced after the Ship of Fools and all his shenanigans about talking about these history part, he said something very important about how laws introduced, penal laws, that kind of like criminalize anyone, vagabond, or anyone who kind of not allowed to work, like anyone who's cannot work, right? He can be fined and put, and these mad people at the time, like what we conceive as the idiot village, right, at the time, or the Ship of Fools, these notions in now, it's hard to comprehend, right? Because at that time, the dealing with madness, the families, how to deal with madness is different from now, right? Because the introduction of laws like that mandatory work, right? The mandatory work laws in France, for example, or in European countries or in Africa, right? That's put the family in a position that either they kind of like, because the mad person is a burden of the family because he cannot work, right? He cannot he cannot provide for his family. He cannot do these kind of things. So these kind of minor things in the 17th century kind of like produce this kind of like, emergent burden, right? It's become burden for the family to keep a mad person in a village or in a town or or you understand what I mean, Brooks? Yeah.
I do.
Quick
One
question.
second.
Does this
Please.
have to do with what you said, the overwhelming financial dependency? Do you think it comes from the same line? Because I feel like
This touches into that because so for them, it's the way that, for example, a wife or a child, or even someone who's on a health plan from a company, which again wasn't a thing that existed back then, but I think now is very easy for us to talk about. The relationship that the psychoanalyst would want to talk about is you with your father. Oh, your boss, you're upset with your boss, or the wife with the husband, or the child with the father. And it would be extracted from all of its social realities and placed into this familial personage that is symbolic and removed from the reality that there's dependency, the reality that there's social frustrations or crushing that happens with it. Like it's very much that, and to what what Marcellus was sort of talking about, the underlying thing that is starting to happen is Foucault talks about this, that the family becomes both the cause and the judge, because it's explanatory and moralistic at the same time. The closed asylum becomes artificial family. Like, these things start playing a really interesting dual role of both the reason it's happening, but also the only way we can save ourselves. The cure and the disease become the same sort of thing. And the odd interplay that's happening here that is not great, we'll just say, for sort of recreating this overall structure over and over and over and over and over and over and over, which is what's happening.
I believe that this part touched on the reason I ask why it's related, because has it not ever been a burden for a village or a family to keep a mad person around? Has it ever not been a burden for them? You know, maybe there's a line where it starts to become a different kind of burden.
Well, this is Foucault goes into like the history of madness, and Deleuze even writes on it a little bit, but a lot of people have spent time on it. Madness, and what we consider mad, has taken very different functional social roles over time. An example I've always loved is the way that the Oracle at Delphi existed. Some people talk about it as though it was like a gas leak, because that's kind of as close as it gets. The Oracle at Delphi wasn't probably an oracle, just so you know. Probably couldn't tell the future. And in fact, the seers of all sorts were probably deeply mentally non-normative. But because of how social functions existed and people found themselves in those positions, you started to move from where we are now, which is, oh, they're broken, we can't use them. They're not worthwhile, they need to be fixed, they need to be a proper cog in the machine, versus whatever people were, the machine would find a use for them. The Earth Socialists, for example, people were in their position based on relationships, not necessarily how their labor could be utilized or how much money that they had at any given time, which is much closer to now. The king would appoint or anoint people being important. The king determined your social position in a much different way. The way we are now, it exists almost determined by like things, like market forces, you could say. But that thing that's happening, that change of how we find where we belong, or how people find where they belong, it has changed drastically. Would people who are mad or mentally non-normative be a stress on a tribe? Yes, I would assume probably. But would they be any more of a stress than someone who's not? And that's the question. Like, what does that mean? And what does stress mean? And how do they utilize what is being produced and how these interactions are happening? And that's, again, this is, I think, Foucault's point for the most part. Like what has happened over time to madness, and how madness is almost a new category, or how madness was handled before. Like there's a whole bunch of different social things that have sort of risen above and around it that becomes a more interesting, larger question, I think. Does that make sense? No?
It does. It sounds like it might be more beneficial to have a little bit Foucault reading in here, but I will dig a little bit more into it. Thank you.
Yeah. Foucault's, with a grain of salt, Foucault's exceptionally worth reading. His writing's very good. I find his writing very good and lucid and kind of really fun to read, to be frank. The Order of Things is, I think, one of my favorite works of his. Maybe it is my favorite work of his. And it's one of my favorite books to read because it's just a really fun, like mentally charging read. But his books on madness across the board, his books on discipline and punish, like all of that stuff is amazing. Like, he's done really good work with a grain of salt again.
I just find it really interesting because like I actually just looked at Madness and Civilization, and like he was saying, for the 19th century, the model of madness was to believe that you were God. In preceding centuries, to be mad was to deny God's existence. I find that it's very fun to read. Like that actually is
he's very fun. Like again, I really like Foucault's writing, and I think it's even if you don't necessarily agree with everything he says, I find him to be extremely provocative with how he phrases things. So yeah, it's
I really agree with that. Yeah, he's very
Now,
provocative.
what I wanted to ask is, have anybody did a comparative one on such literature in the same time frame, maybe in China or in Japan? So that comparison would be very interesting.
Francois Julien has a little bit around that, and there's a couple other writers who I will be able to get you some afterwards, because the way China has opened up over the last, say, 30 years versus the 30 years prior, like in 1970, like these books were written at the end of the 60s. There wasn't like a lot of openness in terms of like how people viewed or were able to study. So it's actually been a really interesting burgeoning field for the last, I don't want to say 10, 20 years, but definitely the last 10 for sure.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff before that, we'll just say, is definitely on the Orientalist side. And
well, even if they had a huge psychoanalytic movement starting from 2016, you would be surprised how much closeness that they still have in their domestication of psychoanalysis. But that's a different history study. But
for sure. Goddard asks if that story is true. I don't know what story you're talking about. You might have to be more specific. But to continue, meme of tomorrow's story. Vested Social Books had a story about a guy who left civilization to make statues. That's Sarah's book. Yes, I believe that story is actually true. If not, again, what's truth? But at this point, we're talking about, again, the way that psychoanalysis is recreating the structure via this odd symbolic method where we have to properly become Oedipalized. We have to, and by Oedipalized, it's placing ourselves as an ego against symbolic people, not the real people, not actual mom and dad, but mom and dad, which are not actual people. Like mom and dad are the global pronouns, right? Like that's, if I say, hey, how's mom doing? Everyone here thinks of a person. That's the thing. It's a symbolic position. It's a point. It's not really a person. And our relationship to that, if I say, how do you feel about your mom? We all have a thing, but I'm not talking to any of you. I don't know any of you. I'm not talking about any of your moms. I could make a your mom joke here because it works on all of you for the exact same reason. And this is the thing that psychoanalysis is enabling everyone to make your mom jokes, basically. Actually, that's not untrue. And so the setup that is happening, and again, before we even get to the fourth sentence of this, because fuck me, the setup that's happening and the thing that's going on is psychoanalysis is basically playing with, and instead of taking, a person needs to be figured out inside of the asylum walls, which is, again, they're talking about psychiatry to psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis goes, why even have walls? Because inside of the asylum, hey, you need to learn to listen to the doctor. The nurse is there to take care of you. Again, I'm talking about more traditional psychiatric care years ago, not right now. With psychoanalysis, it's like, why don't we just build into someone the asylum? Why don't we just build the asylum in them? But the resistance of the psychoses on the one hand, the necessity for taking into account a social etiology on the other, has led psychiatrists and psychoanalysts to redeploy under open conditions the order of an extended family, which is still believed to possess the secret of the illness as well as its cure. The whole thing is about getting beyond this, the simple family that you have, which is just the people around you. Like, you have a family, probably. Most of us in some capacity have a family. How do we get beyond that? Because psychiatric was having some like trying to have that sort of relationship, but psychoanalytic, how do we actually create this larger thing, contain it all within this Oedipal framework, and with this, create a social causation within you, that everything you do socially is because of you and your relationship to your parents, how you grew up, how your parents taught you how to behave, how your parents taught you how to regard everyone. That's silly if you take a moment with it, but this is the setup. The extended familial logic was extended rather than abandoned. When we started to have bigger understandings of the rest of the world, it was like, oh shit, there's all this other social stuff happening, and we have like Marx comes around, he's like, look, oppression and labor and this and that, and it's like, oh fuck. And instead of going, well, there's all this other stuff, it's like, yes, but what if that's also mom and dad? Oh shit, that's a good idea. What if that is also mom and dad? And after the family has been internalized in Oedipus, Oedipus is externalized in the symbolic order, in the institutional order, the community order, the sectorial order, blah, blah, political order, name a fucking thing, name a thing. Doesn't even matter at this point, because Oedipus is now extended way out beyond the family, even though it's the same structure as what created that family in the first place, and also supposedly the problem, but also the cure. And it gets to sort of be everything. Isn't that fun that we do that? And that we do. Well, all of us do. This is the nature of the symbolic, that we're able to have these positions that we can then find related to other things. We can find ways to relate them, find ways to make them similar, or just wholly erase them. Anyone who's an authority figure is daddy. Anyone who's mothering you or someone you might desire could be mommy. And again, reverse the sexes if you're a woman even at this point. Everything can come back to it. Go for it, LJ.
Quick question. When you say everything,
yes,
because there are certain kind of literature, regardless as we have to do with Lacan or these other schools, just because that there is a symbolizing effort and network does not necessarily means that it is more productive in the sociist sense, where, you know, it's like, oh,
it would be less productive, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's like there is this futile symbolizing efforts by a lot of these, even from earlier schools of psychoanalysis. I wonder, does everything, whether it actually relies on the sociist concept to actually spread out to everywhere? Because it seems like it does with the Earth one, but sometimes the capitalistic one actually prevents and constricts the spread of the everything.
The capitalist doesn't do that. No. So the capital doesn't repress or hold anything back. It's, again, the way that social machines and desire work within the socius, where the repression happens. So the Earth socius specifically is built around sort of the immediate capture and deployment of desire. It's only the connective synthesis. It's the connection, disconnection. That's it. And we move to the second step, which is the disjunctive of either or either or. But the either or happens within the second socius. And then the third, which is capital, we find ourselves in the either or, but also the miraculating in sort of that third step. But within capital, go ahead.
What I'm saying is, like, exactly, I completely agree with what you said, because the capitalist socialist doesn't care, right? So it goes to this area where you have the disjunctive, but somehow there's something else that's going to dissolve the sense of disjunctive, where it's almost as if everything goes, right? So the repressive structure that was inherited from maybe within the family, maybe within somewhere else that has been there before, it might not even hold in the socius. That's why I was asking.
But it doesn't hold in the socius. This is, again, so the setup here and how it happens, and it's what enables the axiomatic to create the repressive structure, is the nature of the representational. So when I have mommy, daddy, me, and that symbolization is sort of the baseline or built into me, or that I have that understanding of the relationship that I have with my own father, Randy, but I understand that as symbolic of all these other types of relationships. What that does is it enables within how the forces, the impulses I exist within, they very quickly sort of utilize that to generate the rest of the story. So when I talk about, because it's a step-by-step thing, but desire itself doesn't actually want anything. But the selective process of either or that happens over time, that's built into me over the repetition and the rewriting and the writing and the writing, body without organs and all that. This thing happens because of effectively a set theory of sorts, where the axiomatics of those sets determine whether or not something is in them. It's either or. And that symbolic relationship allows the writing of all of those, all the sets. Dad can be in just a fuck ton of sets, and also as a rule of a fuck ton of sets, even though he's literally one contingent person in my life. Suddenly he's able to be everywhere. Suddenly the axiomatics that are able to be written can go across.
I think I got it, because my way to describe this, where you touch this idea of the representation, where it start to use representation to rewrite everything, and you go into an area where the representation and the real thing itself start to become more intermingled. Which one is more real? It go to this area where it's not very certain the representation is more real or the thing that it's referring to is more real. Do you agree with this description? There's certain far away layers that operates at the hinge of a lot of these, but it start to have this layer that rewrites things, as you said.
Well, except they're all the same layer.
Okay, sure. Okay.
Which is, again, what makes it, it's tough to sort of conceptualize, because I was steeped before I came to this. I was very steeped in Zizekian, Lacanian thought, where it's like, okay, well, here's this symbolic order, and then there's all these fucking knots and layers and everything. But for Deleuze and Guattari's work and the work of those around them, it's important to remember that there isn't a social order that is different from the personal order that is different from desiring machines. They're all the same layer. And imminently, all of it is immediately produced. The real is what is produced and ongoing produced. So the thing that is actualized is the real. And of course, immediately becomes part of the virtual again, but all of it is at once that, and then sucked back up, and then we put it out again, and it's constant.
Yeah. So would you say that this kind of socius has a certain tendencies to touch a little bit on the real, but almost bypass the symbolic and then reproduce another part of the real and back into itself?
There is no symbolic.
Yeah, but okay. So basically, okay. It's really strange that I found myself agree with Lacan and Deleuze and Guattari at the same time, but I think.
Well, I mean, Guattari agrees with a lot of Lacan, as much as people say otherwise. He doesn't have we've talked about this. This paragraph, as it's talking about here, is critiquing psychoanalysis, who claimed this revolutionary break. Freud's thing was like, you won't believe how much this is going to change everything. We're going to get rid of the asylums, because that was what it was founded on. Like asylums, which were horrifying nightmares prior to not that they were great in the 1900s, but prior to that, they were some other thing. And psychiatric sort of care was very medical based and very brutal, and amputation and awful shit sort of took place all the time because they had a lot of wacky theories. But psychoanalysis came along, and Freud was like, hey, we don't really need the asylum anymore, because what he wanted to do is really spend time on the person and writing them and building them in a way that could work socially, that could go outside of the asylum walls. And what ended up happening is, instead of the liberation and the elimination of the asylum in totality, instead what happened is the familial control was manifested and privatized through this therapeutic relationship that rebuilt it internally to a person, and that created the very same walls, but did so internally. And that's
Yeah.
the thing that they're talking about here. The expansion sort of happens once on one side, the resistance of the psychoses, which the Oedipal frameworks couldn't contain, and also the social ideology they talk about. And what psychoanalysis did is it redeployed under open conditions the order of an extended family, instead of abandoning the logic of the nuclear familial, right? And so if you think about it and you look at it sort of dialectically, you're talking about that, like, and they phrase it, after the family had been internalized in Oedipus, Oedipus is externalized in the symbolic order, the institutional order, the community order. And so this process is something that happens in there.
Okay. I think this is a place where it's actually important to make some sort of a decision on which side that one person leans more towards.
Oh yeah, for sure. And Afnan's right that it's probably better to say that Lacan would agree with Guattari. Although I got to tell you, I've been reading more and more transversality, and I think, well, it is absolutely a critique of Lacan, like clearly. Man, it's hard for me not to just see that it's the same way Klosowski has a unique reading of Nietzsche. It's almost that kind of thing.
Okay.
It's tough. It's tough.
I'm gonna say this very unprofessional. My impression. It sounds like if I'm living in a different continent that is not that's not North America, I feel like I would agree with Lacan more. But because of my past experience in California for the past many years, I found myself to not agree with Lacan more here. So it's an interesting impression when it comes to geology, but I'm taking.
Well, no, but again, this is, I think, their critique is, again, so for Lacan, a lot of stuff is suppressed or repressed and these kinds of things. And they're like, well, it's not really that. It's the way this apparatus works is not necessarily through this sort of oversimplified suppression, but instead it's a very sophisticated appropriation and extension. Because of how this sort of operates, the movements of things are captured not by a direct opposition, but because they become incorporated with the frameworks that they're supposedly critiquing. So again, as they're laying out, schizoanalysis, a genuine break or revolution within psychiatric thought, is not about reforming familial frameworks, but instead abandoning like that understanding or that structure entirely and understanding desire as immediately social, political, and emergent.
Yeah, I really like the way you say it's not really about repression anymore. It's about appropriation. I like this. When you put these two words side by side, a lot of my past experience start to make a lot more sense than I want them to be honest. But I think you know what I'm talking about. I still have left a lot of details, but yeah, it starts to make a lot more sense. Maybe it's because this is the part where Lacan and also other people says, "Oh, the name of the father is fading away." You know, maybe it has to do with that from the more traditional side. But
well, even Lacan, and it's again, it's more kind than I think people generally give them credit for, but they have the phrase in here that Lacan's symbolic order ultimately is utilized for grounding a structural Oedipus applicable to psychosis, or extending familial coordinates beyond their real and imaginary domain. Because the whole thing that they're saying is that the advanced frameworks still become systematically diverted. It doesn't matter how many times this is reborn or added. Now that we've created that very simplistic triangle, and nothing gets more simple than mommy, daddy, me, like there is no, better way to create the coordinates of who you are or where you're at socially than this very simplistic triangle. And you're always coordinated socially in this triangle. And as such, everything becomes crushed to it. It doesn't matter how much more complex you get, as long as you stay within this bounds of what family is, or defined by the nuclear family or setup, you're eternally stuck inside of that. It doesn't matter how cool you get. And Lacan gets super cool, but doesn't matter.
Another quick last question around this. Does this, because I've keep the despotic signifier keep jumping back to this, jumping back to my mind when it comes to, as long as you get yourself captured in that system, then you'll be good, or your productive things will be spreading out, or the signifier will still hold its original meanings. Does the despotic one actually come to your mind when you're going through this paragraph?
No. This is because the despotic wouldn't require this. The despotic, how someone writes themselves. So again, this comes back to how does one, let's take the egoist position. How do you know where you exist socially or who you are as a person? Now, under other socius, it was a lot easier. The Earth socius, it was a complex set of debt relations, but you generally knew where you were at any given moment based on the family line you had and the alliant line of who you worked with. The king determined where you were in despotic, which makes it a lot easier, to be frank, because all lines go through the king. So the king says, oh, these people who live here are my prize. These people are not. You're determined by these various relationships. Within capital, there's nothing. Like, you're free to tell me what does it do? Well, what it does is capital didn't really have anything, and it was not great. But then Freud came along and said, I know what we can do. Let's make it a sort of transportational, transliterative triangle. Just everyone's just, you write yourself wherever you're at based on mommy, daddy, me. And, oh, it's your relationship with these things. That's how you know who you are or what kind of person you are or what you should be doing. It's always the triangle. And this is internalized. None of you know my relationship with my parents in any capacity, nor do I know yours. We don't know famous people who have reality shows with their parents. We don't know their It's not how it works. But how people place themselves is through this. How people decide who they are is through this, or how someone else is. Oh, they have daddy issues, mommy issues. They're bad with money, good with money because mom and dad, blah, 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 blah. That these things still determine them. And despite capital absolutely just doing whatever the fuck it's doing, we find a way to write ourselves. Oh, I'm a good person because I'm this and this. Oh, my dad, I do what my dad says. And I've learned not to lust after women or lust after partners because I know how to hold off on desire. I'm properly good. I'm not the grasshopper who fiddles all summer and then starves in the winter. I am an ant who knows to do work. Whatever that is, that thing is because of the triangle that everyone's stuck with. And it doesn't matter how cool you get or how complex you try to make that triangle, it's still the triangle. And that's kind of their point. It's not by chance that these things are diverted. It's structural. It is set up. It's not by chance that institutional analysis has difficulty in maintaining a position against the reconstitution of artificial families, where the symbolic order embodied in the institution reforms group Oedipuses with all the lethal characteristics of the subjugated groups, because it's always crushing desire in service of the group. Always crushing desire in service of the triangle or whatever it may be, because it's set up there no matter what. And I kind of want to move to the next paragraph. If everyone's okay with that, I'll leave it open for 2 seconds before I move on, because if anyone's having trouble with this, that's like the jam. But did I miss anything? Is there anything anyone wants me to spend a little bit more time on? Because I'm reading through it, I kind of think I hit everything for the most part. I see Dan typing. I will allow you to type. Lethal in the sense of forgetting. Oh, God, yes. Lethal is an interesting word there, isn't it? Man, I love having you people in here. I don't think lethal in the sense of forgetting, because subjugated is not the good one. I guess I'll say, I don't want to put an ethical thing. This pushes back to the previous paragraph. Previous paragraph ends, that's why we speak of an Oedipal narcissist machine at the end of which the ego encounters its own death. As Oedipus happens, and this is within all subjugated groups necessarily, that you find a way to have, there's 4, then 3, mommy, daddy, me, then ultimately 2 because we kill one of the others, and then 1. The direction it's always going is to death. With all the lethal characteristics of the subjugated groups, it's the same thing. It's the same push towards death is how I read this. The use of lethal there is, that's actually really interesting. Do they have lethal in the other ones? Yeah, they do. It's about deadly consequences. Oedipus is the model of death because it's always pushing towards crushing to fewer things with, even though it doesn't reach 0, what we experience it as is the multitude of everything, and then fewer things, and then 1, and then that ultimately means we're like, that is just put those numbers on a curve. It's a bad day. Put those numbers on a curve, it's a bad day because it ends in 0. Yog, I'm officially too fucking stupid. No, so a lot of what I'm doing right now, as I said earlier, it's a good idea to, when you come to Anti-Oedipus, if you decide you like this book and it's worth doing, it's worth reading Freud and really reading Lacan and reading Guattari's work and Deleuze's work outside of it. There is a lot in these paragraphs that is stuff that's like, hey, here's what they're arguing against. But if you don't have that, it feels like you're stupid because I have to teach you a thing that's already complicated. Lacan is like the most complicated thing. And that's if you buy that he is a cohesive thing, which I don't necessarily. And it's still complicated, even when you do that sort of semi-dismissing. Freud is not exactly simple. Klein, all of these, Reich, their writing's incredibly complicated. They're critiquing complicated things with something else. So you don't have to get too worried about it, Yagi. It's not just you. This is complicated shit. And it's annoying. It's annoying, complicated shit. But it's how they're able to get very particular, which is kind of the important thing. The particularity of what they're doing is the point. Because they're driving that critique down really tight. If you started Eugene Holland's Intro to Schizoanalysis, it will help a great deal. It'll help a great deal, especially with this. He's very good at being very succinct with the parts of Freud or Lacan you need to understand. He's very good at that. So I highly recommend that, by the way, if anyone's ever curious. I highly recommend Holland's book on AO. All right. Any other notes? Because we're about to get into anti-psychiatry, which is, like, I don't even want to talk about Lang or Cooper at this point, but I may have to, and it's going to be just more people. I have to explain, hey, here's other really complicated thinkers critiquing something complicated that is now being critiqued in a complicated way. Enjoy! What is more, anti-psychiatry, yeah, that's where we're at, anti-psychiatry. Anti-psychiatry has sought the secret of a causality at once social and schizophrenic in the redeployed families. I'm going to stop and pause there. The anti-psychiatrist movement, which they ascribe to a good deal of the things in it, is not doing the same move they're making, and they're also critiquing it. So just be ready for a lot of, if you're not up on this language, enjoy the jargon. This is perhaps where the mystification appears most clearly, because anti-psychiatry, by certain of its aspects, was the most suited to break with traditional familial reference. What does one see, in fact, in the American familialist studies pursued by anti-psychiatrists? Completely ordinary families are baptized as schizophrenogenic, as well as completely ordinary familial mechanisms and an ordinary familial logic, i.e. neuroticizing at worst. In so-called schizophrenic familial monographs, everyone easily recognizes his own daddy, his own mommy. For example, Bateson's double impasse or double bind. Where is there a father who doesn't simultaneously transmit the two contradictory injunctions? Let's be friends, son. I'm the best friend you've got. And, watch out, son. Don't treat me like one of your buddies. There's nothing there with which to make schizophrenic. We have seen in this sense that the double impasse is in no way defined We have seen in this sense that the double impasse in no way defined a specific schizophrenogenic mechanism, but merely characterized Oedipus in the whole of its extension. If there is a veritable impasse, a veritable contradiction, it is the one into which the researcher himself is led when he claims to assign schizophrenogenic social mechanisms and at the same time to discover them within the order of the family, which both social production and the schizophrenic process escape. This contradiction is perhaps especially perceptible in Lang, because he is the most revolutionary of the anti-psychiatrists. At the very moment he breaks with psychiatric practice, undertakes assigning a veritable social genesis to psychosis, and calls for a continuation of the voyage as a process and for the dissolution of the normal ego, he falls back into the worst familialist, personological, and egoic postulates, so that the remedies invoked are no more than a sincere corroboration among parents, a recognition of the real persons, a discovery of the true ego or self, as in Martin Buber. I probably won't even explain that. Even more than the hostility of traditional authorities, perhaps this is the source of the actual failure of the anti-psychiatric undertakings of their co-options for the benefit of adaptational forms of familial psychotherapy and of community psychiatry, and of Lang's own retreat to the Orient. And is not a contradiction on another level. And is it not a contradiction on another level, but analogous, when some, attempting to hasten the teaching of Lacan, place it back on a familial and personological axis, where Lacan assigns the cause of desire into a non-human object, heterogeneous to the person, below the minimum conditions of identity, escaping the intersubjective coordinates as well as the world of meanings. I'm going to go have a stroke now. I hate this. Anti-psychiatry has some history. Yeah, this is going over your head. Dude, here's the thing. This is one of those paragraphs that's just going to go over everyone's head, because what they're doing is they're basically going through and critiquing a movement that honestly doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, I know there are hangers on. I know there's parts of it, but to say this is a meaningful movement at this point is, I think, on its face, silly. So this stuff, a lot of the thoughts of it is stuff that was at the time sort of coming around, but since has been just sort of summarily pushed to the side. Like, you're not going to find a lot of Lang writings in general when it comes to this stuff. And he's like the closest we get. Some of the others, like Cooper and others, it's like, for fuck's sake. But they're going over it and saying, like, hey, with anti-psychiatry, there's this weird thing. There's this movement we think has the best potential to break with familialism. And what it ended up doing, as they said will happen in the previous paragraph, it ended up like basically becoming the most sophisticated purveyors of familialism. So we have, we're going to go through sentence by sentence, but like I think overall is probably better to sort of start with. They talk about how anti-psychiatry went out and sought, quote, the secret of a causality at once social and schizophrenic, right? That's the thing. Once social and schizophrenic in the redeployed families. Because the way it sort of ended up working, it makes its failure very tragic. They really talked about and they wrote about how they were going to be getting rid of the familialism, that they're going to be getting rid of these presumptions and go with, at the time, the very strong social anthropological setup. Godelier was not only known by Marx, he was very, very well known dude. But like that thing, there was a weird play that happened. Because even though they were the most suited to break it, they did some really weird shit when it came to how they would basically take families and talk about them as, they use the phrase schizophrenogenic, which is just it's overwriting. It's just such a weird word to use for it. But they would look at families and go, oh, see, that family is schizophrenic because dad is saying that he's not just your buddy, but that he's the best friend you have. And this is a normal. That's not interesting. That's not schizophrenic. That's the norm. That's the normative position. If you don't know, most parents will say and warn, your job is not to be your child's best friend, but they will absolutely say that they're here for you. They're your friend. You can trust them with anything. This is not weird. This isn't schizophrenic. This isn't non-normative. It's absolutely the normal thing that families do. And because of this, there's the way that families operate. The anti-psychiatric movement sort of took these universal contradictions that are built in. Like families are weird. They're built in with contradictions. You want intimacy, but you must maintain authority, for example. That's built into the nature of paternalism. Like, that's one of the weird, I'm here to protect you anytime, but if you piss me off, I might slap the shit out of you. Like this, what the fuck? But that isn't interesting. And Bateson's book and writing is about that double bind, that a child is somehow, the place of intimacy, but also the subject of authority. And it's like, yes, but that's not interesting. That's not schizophrenic. That's not breaking norms. That's the normative position. So what are the pathogenic mechanisms that make this happen? They don't ever say it. They just say this is the way the family works by sort of, to put it simply, plastic pills, that garbage YouTuber who says that everyone should just be schizophrenic and then talks about shit like that. That's this. This is what they did. And this is what they're shitting on and laughing about. That people went, oh, that's so schizo because you're being so weird. And it's like, that's not weird. Like, contradictions are normative within all of these spaces. Having contradictions isn't what makes schizophrenia. It's not what makes autism. It's not these other things. What are the pathogenic things behind it? No answer, mind blank, useless. And that's what they're like, that's a fucking shame. Because if you could identify those, you could be useful, but they never did. Instead, they rebuilt the structure by calling it something else. And this fundamental contradiction of how these things work, that is sort of baked into there, is not really in like the family dynamic itself, but instead the methodology that they talk about it when he claims to assign schizophrenic social mechanisms. At the same time, to discover them within the order of the family, which both social production and schizophrenic processes escape. They're laughing about this because this is a logical impossibility. The social mechanisms within structures that social processes inherently transcend doesn't work. They're like,
Hi, Brooke.
Hey, what's up, Afnan?
Hey.
Go for it.
I just wanted to ask you a question since right now you're reading through the text between the 50s and the 71.
I'm trying.
Guattari. Yeah. So do you think, based on what you just explained, the problem of how they understood or how they started dealing with schizoanalysis or schizophrenic in this way, and then as if something that can just be that weirdo, be that one who goes out of the norm, but whatever. Can't you see a relation directly between this and the way that smoothing was celebrated to some extent in Anti-Oedipus when during the writings actually of smoothing, because the idea of smoothing is Guattari's during the 60s, and like it wasn't celebrated. It wasn't dealt with as a celebration. And Deleuze understood that to the point that he even wrote it in, if I recall, in Anti-Oedipus. He did say that we should not think that smoothing will save us. Yet he more or less, in the way he wrote it, in the way he dealt with smoothing, in the part of it, it was more of a celebration. Like, it was more of a, as if smoothing could save us. Although he does say it will not save us. But I don't know if you got the idea. Like, smoothing is part of the schizo weirdo who goes out, who breaks the norm, who deteriorizes, who whatever.
Smoothing is part of the emergent processes. And that's, I think, their critique here is that they would go around and say, oh, look, here is stuff that's happening. It must be schizo. And they're like, hey, actually, no, these are things that people live with, these weird contradictions. Like, contradictions themselves aren't interesting. What's the thing behind it? And there's no answer. For them, they want to go, hey, instead of thinking the family has this definition, the familial is in this place, here is the structure. What if we did away with that and we just let desire become and consider it itself as an emergent, non-directive, non-goal oriented thing? And so when we're talking about like the way that smoothing operates, or smooth spaces, I tend to say smooth spaces, but because it's the maintenance of the smooth space. But smooth spaces, as they sort of work, have no hierarchy, have no setup. It is a space for emergence, more or less. And the maintenance of spaces that allows emergence versus the spaces that are hierarchized and structurated, I think, is what they're starting to hit at. Because the anti-psychiatrist movement at a base level, they really did. And I think if you read the writings, it's clear they were really, I mean, I don't know if I shouldn't say they were really trying, but they weren't like wanting the family to stick around. Like they didn't like explicitly start out by saying, hey, you know what? We want the family to be a thing. They were actually trying to find ways to break through it and trying to break around it, but they still presumed the tautological a priori reality of family. And by doing so, they worked from that and said, look, here are the contradictions inherent within the system. And it's like, great, but that's not interesting. What about the emergence? And this is, for me, the thing that is, when you talk about smoothing, and again, we're starting to get on the edge of things that I think are more complex than really what's here. But this is touching into that. But their critique of anti-psychiatry is that they didn't realize that they were not maintaining or building a smooth space. They were actually building far more complex structures inside of people. Does that make sense, Afnan?
It does. I get what you mean. I mean, obviously, the anti-psychiatric movements weren't exactly thinking about smoothing. But then when you see, for example, some of the what so-called Deleuzians, in some sense, you can take Land as an example of that, ideology or something like that, then it's just basically, as I see it, the main misunderstanding that Land, for example, has with all the accelerationists is basically thinking that smoothing could save something, and smoothing is the only process. Although it's not the only process, they do understand it's not the only process, but they think of as they can actually manipulate and control the relation between capture and smoothing and deterritorialization. And when that's not how it works. And I blame in that to
Correct.
some extent. Yeah, I blame in that to some extent the way Deleuze wrote it. Although he clearly states that smoothing can't save us, he still dealt with it in some way as if it's the positive thing, the good thing about the relation between the actual and the virtual. When for example, since you're reading now Guattari, when you're reading Guattari, he doesn't have this celebration of neither. And by the way, Deleuze in what is philosophy has like stopped doing this, but he did it in Anti-Oedipus. He did write it. And if you read the papers that Guattari sent to Deleuze for this, it wasn't celebrated as the way it was celebrated in Anti-Oedipus. In that chapter, I think personally, I did the same. Like personally, when I read it, I thought of it the same way as everyone's, as that, oh, smoothing is the good thing, the smooth space, the deterritorialization, and completely ignored the factor that you can't control either. It's a process that they both have their own existence.
Very
real.
much.
Exactly.
Well, no, and you're not alone. And it's, I think, a thing a lot of people, when you're reading through AO, and I believe certainly for 1,000 Plateaus, I think this is the case. You run into the thing where people start to think, oh, here's the things I can do. Here's how I can become this or that. And it's like, this is not about you actively doing things. It's about you understanding the process of your own constitution and creation. And then as that happens, being aware of it. This is, again, why I'm reading this, and I can't help but read anything through Klosowski's Vicious Circle. But that vibration we have as we oscillate between the model of things and the emergent world as we experience it, experience to model, or you could say as desire pulses and the BWO responds, or desire responds to the BWO, however you want to phrase it. That understanding itself changes how things are built and changes how our impulses interact with that just by being aware of it. And if that's the case, as Deleuze and Guattari and Klosowski and others talk about, this is where we are able to begin to find emancipation. This is where we're able to begin to understand and through this begin to modify. But the idea needs to start even further back than, hey, I'm going to go create smooth spaces. Because, Sloterdijk's one critique of Deleuze, which I really love, and I wish Deleuze was, when he said it, Deleuze was alive, because I would have loved to have understood how he understood this. But have you ever seen garlic? Garlic's a rhizome, unless it wants to be a tree, because it does what it needs. And it doesn't need anything, but it...
Wait, what?
Garlic has vertical shoots. It also grows like a rhizome, but it also has vertical shoots. Wholly vertical, 100% hierarchized, because if it at any point starts running out of this, or it's growing too much, it just creates a new shoot, which can get more photosynthesis and stuff from the sun. Now, it doesn't know this, it's not aware, but a vertical shoot doesn't necessarily mean that it's not rhizomatic. It's an interesting point, and I think a very fair one.
I am
So
dumbfounded somehow. I still don't get it, but okay.
Rhizomes are things that build and grow sort of as they emergently need at any given moment, and they don't do so in a hierarchized setup. A tree first builds the shoot, and
I believe understood when you were mentioning about some sort of like tarot cards and something similar that has to do with it, but garlic? How does
garlic is a rhizome. Like literally, it's
okay. I'll dig a little bit more into it. This is
like the name, like rhizome as a thing. The word comes from, like, it is the thing. I don't know how to put, like, the word rhizome comes from specific types of plants. Potatoes are rhizomes. This is like I don't want to say the genus because that's probably the wrong fucking words, but thank you, Dan. So it's a modified subterranean plant stem that sends out roots and shoots from its nodes, and it grows as it needs to. And a lot of people think that this means there's no hierarchy in it, but there is, because sometimes there are shoots. Garlic grows vertically. Now what this doesn't, but then that dies and it continues, and it's kind of this whatever needs to be happening. It's a very interesting thing to consider when we're talking about, again, Afnan and I go way down weird roads here. This is not even about this paragraph at this point. So apologies for that, LJ. But it's, yeah, it's a fun discussion. I can't help, but my brain can't help do it. No, it's not your bad. There's no bad. This is, we go where we go. That's the point. That's the point. That's the point. But to bring back to the paragraph, or try to, I think, as a thing. There is a sophisticated process as we saw in the previous. This is sophisticated appropriation, not simply suppression or repression that is happening here. This is the same thing they're pushing through and going again and running with all over again and again and again. And they will continue to do this because the whole point is that there is a way for all theory to, without even really knowing it. And again, if you read Lang and others, it's clear they aren't aware of it, but it is already domesticated. And if you are going to be building a revolutionary position, you must be ready and aware the types of capture that exist, how these things happen, and how it's built into the thing. The end is built into the beginning without you being aware of it. And that is more or less this entire paragraph. Like, I feel like I could go through the entire thing, but that's really what they're driving at. God damn, I feel like I don't want to go through this entire thing. I fucking hate this paragraph. I don't have a lot of things like this, but I don't like this. Because that's the last thing is the thing. Like, because you don't even know about, like, specifically what teachings of Lacan, but that last bit, right? It is not a contradiction on another level, but analogous. When some, attempting to hasten the teaching of Lacan, place it back on a familial and personal logical axis. Zizek has done this, and he tries not to do it, but Lacan's thing wasn't really trying to be personological or personal or about you or a dude, but instead about sort of the structuration socially. I don't think it was super successful, but all of this stuff happens pre-subjective. You could have the Lacan's object petita, all this stuff, but we now place it and we create it as this thing where it becomes, instead of intersubjective, which I think Guattari's reading of Lacan goes, and I tend to as well. Instead, it's about this sort of personal or symbolic domain becoming transcendent. And that is the thing that you see in these different things that they're talking about. And they're shitting on all of these things. And I feel I don't want to go into like Bouber's like existentialism and all that shit. I don't feel like that. I don't want to do any of this. I hate this paragraph so much. We can do the Indembu. That's the next paragraph. I like the Indembu. That part I know because I've read that, but this is like stuff I'm not going to pretend I'm even slightly strong on. The overall critique is that, though. I'm certain that the overall critique is that. They may have very specific nuanced points in here, but the whole point is that they're creating and building the familial into things as the baseline of this shit without even thinking twice about it, without even being aware of it. And Lang, who is, as they say, like the most revolutionary, he did crazy stuff, wrote amazing things, but as he gets at his most radical, where he breaks with practice, demands social genesis of psychosis, blah, 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 he ultimately becomes, again, the worst familialist because his remedies are basically talking about corroboration among parents, what parents commonly do, what the real relation, like they still fuck it up because they still consider the family to be transcendent. That's the big deal. That's the big deal. Does anyone have anything to add on this shit? Because I don't. I really don't. I hate this paragraph. I don't have. Last year, during our reading, if you want to go back and listen, I think it's still up. You can actually listen to us spend, I think it was 3 straight readings on this paragraph, going through the texts, and it turned out it didn't add anything. It added a little bit of clarity in terms of, oh, They're just bringing the family back. But that, I can just tell you that, so. I don't know. The potato is the tuber, just part of a rhizome. Yes, technically that's true. The rhizome is the entire organism. I've always wanted to know, are aspen trees that? Because aspen trees are kind of one single organism, in theory. How these things work, there's a lot of questions. It's fun stuff, but yeah. God, my brain's dying. I hate this paragraph. Sorry. Ugh. Any questions, any comments on this before I move on? Because I just hate this fucking paragraph. And I'm happy to spend time on it if someone has a thing. I am. But I'm just... One of the things I'd say that's important is the phrasing. Because when people talk about schizophrenia, oh, it's two contradictory things. No. When people have at one point say one thing and then they contradict themselves later, this doesn't mean that even if those two things are, as they talk about it, simultaneously transmitted by a parent, because the parent is eternally transmitting a lot of the things that they've said about how they're going to be friends, but also don't treat me like a friend. This is not schizophrenic to do this. This is not, contradiction doesn't mean schizophrenia. That is not the thing here. There's nothing there with which to make it schizophrenic. Cool. That's the big one I'd like make sure drive home. Yeah. All right. I've slept like absolute shit for the last week and a half. It's been unbelievable. Long live the Ndimbu. For if we follow the detailed account by the ethnologist Turner, the Ndimbu doctor alone has been able to treat Oedipus as an appearance, a decor, to go back to the unconscious libidinal investments of the social field. Oedipal familialism, even and especially in its most modern forms, makes impossible the discovery of what one claims, nevertheless, to be searching for today. Schizophrenogenic social production. In the first place, it is futile to affirm that the family expresses more profound social contradictions, for one confers on it a value as microcosm, gives it the role of a necessary relay for the transformation of social into mental alienation. What is more, one acts as if the libido did not directly invest the social contradictions as such, and in order to awaken, needed these contradictions translated according to the family code. By that very fact, one has already substituted a familial causation or expression for social production, and finds oneself back within the categories of idealist psychiatry. Whatever one's stake in all of this, society is thereby justified. All that remains to contest it with are vague considerations on the sick nature of the family, or, more generally still, considerations on the modern way of life. One has therefore glossed over what is essential, that society is schizophrenizing at the level of its infrastructure, its mode of production, its most precise capitalist economic circuits, that the libido invests this social field, not in a form where it would be expressed and translated by means of a familial microcosm, but in the form where it causes its non-familial breaks and flux, invested as such to enter into the family. Hence, that the familial investments are always a result of the socio-desiring libidinal investments, which alone are primary. Finally, that mental alienation refers directly to these investments and is no less social than social alienation, which refers for its part to the preconscious investments of interest. I highly recommend reading about the Ndembu. I have a bunch of books on them. Turner's stuff is great. There's a lot of really good writing on them. They've talked about this also elsewhere in here. The Ndembu doctor who utilized Oedipus or utilized the family or the connections of the family, but not really to reproduce the family, but instead to sort of assemble them, and in order to do that, to give rise to desire again. It's really interesting because he's the Ndembu doctor who's, we would probably use the more colloquial term these days, like the witch doctor or the shaman kind of thing. It's not like a doctor as we would talk about it, but with Oedipus, with these understanding Oedipus, or I guess understanding the family as superficial, as theatrical elements at best, utilizes this unconscious libidinal investment of the social field directly. And this is what this paragraph is really driving at. Because as they're making their way through and as they're heading to this idea of what everyone's searching for, schizophrenic social production, it's everyone's looking for where do things emerge from? Where are these things built? How do we find these things that emerge? And the system is ultimately, as they're talking about it here, blind to all of the places it's happening, because what it does, and that's just to zoom back a little bit, Oedipal familialism, even and especially in its modern forms, makes impossible this discovery, because the nature of how it works is by starting with the family, you can't get at the emergent. Right? But they make their arguments and they go through it. So the first place, it is futile to affirm that the family expresses more profound social contradictions, for one confers on it a value as microcosm. To say the family expresses the same things or production or style of things as the social space, you are using metaphor and symbols to crush all of the complexity, the vast complexity of the social world. That is, like, think of a person without family, not raised by wolves. Just don't think of their family, and think of all of the things socially that have impinged upon their creation that you do not relate to mom and dad. Just don't do that. No. When you bring in mom and dad, what you can do, understand that they are also social things. That there's no secondary or sedentary or more related to value. But that's what we do, is we say, well, the family is like a microcosm. And at that point, once you've done that, you've given it the role of a necessary relay for the transformation of social alienation into mental alienation. What is more, one acts as if the libido did not directly invest the social contradictions as such, and in order to awaken needed those contradictions translated according to the family code. When we treat the family as the small-scale version of society, this relay and the way that the family becomes an intermediary, instead of understanding that we are alienated socially, Marx style, and we were alienated from all of these things socially, it's internal. And I'm estranged from my family. I'm alienated from my family. I don't get along with my family. The family becomes this small-scale version of society. And this becomes the thing that we start doing. One acts as if one does not directly invest the social contradictions as such. We presume they don't, that those things are told, and then the dad's the one that says them. But wait, those contradictions exist socially. They're built out of these, shut up. That's not what we do. Shh. Quiet. That's not what we do. We don't do that. We don't care about that. We don't talk about that. The family has to be an intermediary. The family is what makes all of us. And so we have the social turned into mental alienation. And that mediation continues. And again, builds across all of this. They say, by that very fact, one has already substituted familial causation or expression for social production and finds oneself back within the categories of an idealist psychiatry. We return to what we seem to have overcome. This is, again, the critique of anti-psychiatry, but also psychoanalysis, all of these things. This is this huge load of shit that's happening. That this process has made us into. And whatever one's stake in all of this, society is thereby justified. Doesn't matter, because it works in reverse too. Family, and I'm not talking about nuclear family. You're born to somebody, people raise you. Your family is kind of presumed, and if you grew up without it, you still are put in foster home. The structure of family is presumed. And as such, because we substitute the family for the social seems presumed. The social becomes itself true and always there. Society, therefore, also becomes justified. So all we need to do at this point is to contest it with that all we can do is vague considerations on the sick nature of the family, or generally still considerations on the modern way of life. Elon Musk and all these stupid fucks in the conservative world who are, well, it's not strong fathers anymore. They're a bunch of soy boys. Oh, the moms are all whores. That's what's happening. That the sick nature of the family means what's going on socially, or socially means the sick nature of the family. The modern way of life is destroying the family. Everything comes back to this Oedipal thing that literally didn't exist prior to Freud, but now is an eternal truth and totality always. And it breaks any ability for us to pay attention to and begin critiquing structural social issues. Everything becomes complaints about family pathology or lifestyle. That's what we do. One is therefore glossed over what is essential. And I think most of this paragraph's actually pretty crisp on its own, but we'll go through some lines. Society is schizophrenizing at the level of its infrastructure, its mode of production, its most precise capitalist economic circuits. We'll stop there. Society produces the social space, all of it. And it is an incredibly complex thing. This isn't just saying television ads. This is everything we experience, which we experience socially. When a child at 6 months old is crawling around the backyard, they're experiencing the social world. If you don't understand that, maybe ask how many kids can actually say they crawled around a backyard or a patio or the studio apartment they grew up in, or the projects, or the yard of the projects. That what a child is able to do is immediately experience everything that is social, and everything it's experiencing is social. It's not just the family. It's not, even though in suburbia you may have had your family yard, you have a yard, you have fences, or not fences, or whatever it may be, you're immediately experiencing the social. Society schizophrenizes at the level of infrastructure, its mode of production, its most precise capitalist economic circuits, and that the libido invests this social field, not in a form where it would be expressed and translated by family, but in the form where it causes non-familial breaks in flux, invested as such to enter into the family. The child, playing in the yard, is taking in the yard, or the neighbor kid who comes over and plays, or the fight that the other neighbors are having behind them, or the upstairs neighbors, downstairs neighbors, someone yelling out the front door, someone else getting shot outside, whatever it is, doesn't matter. All of this, the social space, is because we're put it into kids and we ram it home. It's all about the family. It's the non-familial breaks flux, which is everything, becomes that crushed into and entered into the family. All of these things are directly invested in by desire. Desire is connecting with all of the social spaces. It's just doing. It's just connecting and experiencing. Like, oh, wow, look at all this fucking shit everywhere. And oh my God, look at this. But as that's happening, what's also going with it is mom and dad, me, mommy, daddy, me. I'm your father. I'm your best friend. I'm this. Here's who you are. You are my son. You are this. And suddenly everything is being invested in, but it's being invested in and entering into the family as it does. Entering into the family as it does. I'm just going to finish this real quick. Finally, that mental alienation refers directly to these investments, is no less social than social alienation, which refers for its part to the preconscious investments of interest. So, 4 things. Society itself is schizophrenizing at the level of economic infrastructure. 2, libido directly invests the social field and brings non-familial flux into the family, rather than the family mediating that. The familial investments, 3rd, are always secondary results of primary socio-desiring investments. And 4th, mental and social alienation are equally social. Your issues right now are social issues. All of them. It doesn't matter. There's no internal separation of that. Stop that. There are different types of libidinal investments socially. This is the big push as they're making their way through it. Right? So they want us to be spending time thinking about this as they've been going through from psychoanalytic to anti-psychiatric to now schizoanalytic as they're talking about. And again, I have issues with the wording, but that's their system that they're trying to put forward is intended to compare and contrast against these things. Because if we look at Turner's take on the Ndembu healing practices, and it's earlier in the book, if you don't remember it, I'm not going over it, but it's worth going through. The Oedipal dynamics, which again exist. You have a father, you have a mother. I'm not fucking saying you don't. Like, this is not about obliterating any social connections at all. It's about us understanding how the symbolic and representational work. That it's not just abolish the family. Okay, great. But then what? Well, I don't care. Like, good for you. But instead, hey, wait, what if we understand what they are? That the therapeutic intervention that the Ndembu doctor uses that treats these things as appearance, decor, a stage play, as actors, as masks, while addressing unconscious libidinal investments in the social field suddenly becomes interesting. And this is actually something that can connect directly to desire. Okay? So, the big underlying thing, there's a couple in here, but they're making a handful of really big statements. I went through like the 4, but I'm just going to sort of restate them again because the rest of the book is kind of hinging on a handful of these things. Most of the book has. But it's that infrastructure socially is where we find the schizophrenization. That it's not within the family, as the anti-psychiatrist said, and it's not within the individual, as the psychoanalyst said. It's social. That society is schizophrenizing at the level of infrastructure. It is not a family or an individual pathology. Remember, they said that society produces autistics and schizophrenics the same way it produces Prel shampoo. Now, it's a dated reference. I don't think anyone still uses Prel, but still the point. We are all produced in exactly that same way. This is not, oh, I'm producing myself. How? You're connected to all of that. No industry, no thing exists outside of that. There's no vacuum or break. The schizophrenization is in the infrastructure. And because of that, we need to consider the fact that, and we had before, people would think about, oh, well, the libido is investing in these structures in the family. But, wait, if the structures aren't in the family and they're social, well, that would mean the libido's investing in the social field directly, immediately. Not that the family mediates, or that the family creates their own internal version of it or anything like that. The family is part of it. Like, you can have them as almost conduits, but dad is part of the social field. But the social field's also part of the social field. There is no family version of any of these things. And again, that changes things. It means that it's kind of a causation reversal. The family doesn't mediate social investments. Social investments mediate the family. With that, you can kind of keep chasing it a little bit, because at that point, the familial investments, as they say, are always a result of social desiring libidinal investments, which are primary. This is a complete reversal of the hierarchy that Freud and others and everyone else has been using, which talks about personal or familial investments becoming first and then the social investment afterwards. You'll hear, again, listen to conservatives for 2 minutes. Even some leftists, and you'll hear the same thing, that society is downstream from culture, which is insane, or politics is downstream from culture, or that family is primary and from there we can win. But that's not it at all. And with that, it's important to eliminate the dichotomy between the internal psychic and the social. Mental alienation refers directly to these investments and is no less social than social alienation. There are types of libidinal investments, certainly types of libidinal investments, but they are not, they're not that dichotomy of distinction as we would talk about it. Instead, it should be considered and thought about as unconscious desire versus preconscious interests, which you may have remembered us going and spending a lot of time going through. Is that making sense to everyone?
Hi. Again.
Hello.
I wanted to, if you would draw, just to see your take on it, if you would draw the relation in somewhat between the abstract machine and the schizophrenia, in the sense that the flow of desires and they are being captured, and then you have the paranoia and the schizophrenia. How would you draw the line? Which part of the... Yeah, I think you understood the question.
Say that one more time for me. You want me to contrast the abstract machine to schizophrenia, or how they interact, or...
Yes, how they interact, in the sense that you have within the abstract machine, you have, not within, through the abstract machine, there is the flow of desires, and then that they're being captured with, because of the, basically the clash between the abstract machines and the flow of desires, which is always within the same flow of the desires itself. And then I would think, I can say, for example, I don't know if you would agree with that. That's why I want to see your point on it. I can say that, for example, the relation between the abstract machine and the schizophrenia would be, in some sense, the point in which this clash happens. If we're thinking of the abstract to be something more, as if we're thinking as an Aristotelian, for example, because they were affected, they were influenced by Aristotle specifically when speaking about the phyla or the abstract machine. Yeah. Did you get the question?
Yeah. So to also, just to break it down so that way other people can follow. The abstract machine within capitalism tends to be, and again, there's so many ways these terms are used, it gets frustrating, but we're talking basically about the process of axiomatization, where the abstract rule is somehow part of that process of capture. So the abstract machine on one side basically regulates the decoded flux. So capitalism decodes, and that necessarily needs to be regulated. It is regulated through the abstract machine, which captures these processes, which maintains limits. It reterritorializes. The schizophrenic process, and again, we're talking about the process, not the schizophrenic clinical entity. Extremely difficult and important fucking distinction here, by the way. But the schizophrenic process is one that follows those decoded flux. It basically, I don't want to say follows, it's probably the wrong word because that sort of pretends like it's a person following a path, but the decoded flux and how it connects is sort of enabled to be emergent. It ends up going towards a more absolute deterritorialization. It doesn't really care about limits. It breaks through those things. So as capitalism breaks down codes, it decodes things. So think of, for example, once upon a time, there was a thing called a blacksmith. Yes, these people still exist today, but they do it mostly it's hipsters and weirdos, which is fine. I love weirdos. I am one, also a hipster. But the process of what it means to be a blacksmith isn't the same thing. The code, the social coding or overcoding of what it meant to do that work doesn't exist the same way. And so how do we find meaning within these things? Well, capitalism, how it functions is by breaking down all of the parts. Mostly as it does so for efficiency's sake or breaking it into its pieces as we start to understand, oh, well, what about this piece, as we do that. But as those codes break down and they become meaningless socially, the need inside of society we have to sort of have this flux regulated, have desire regulated, is handled by the abstract machine through capitalism. I tend to talk about them as what I just sort of did. Is that what you were asking about, Afnan?
Yeah, exactly.
So like codes, just because not everyone, it's worth bringing people along for the journey. But like when we talk about codes, they are rules that are tied to place and tradition. It's not the same thing as how mom and dad told you, do unto others or be kind to your sister. No, the codes are incredibly specific and qualitative, and they're powerful. But they exist. They're really tough to find these days significantly. They're still being broken down. Capitalism is constantly sort of undoing these things. And the state comes in to make sure that these things stay regulated. But that's kind of the setup, is capitalism is breaking down these codes that we've had socially for thousands of years, and it's been doing it for a while. This isn't new. This is why labor, for example, for Marx is able to be seen, because it didn't really exist as its own abstract thing. But now we understand labor and how it operates and how people sell their labor. And it's not really about selling a trade, or it's not really about doing work. It's about labor and how we're selling and exchanging our labor. But that is a thing that, 1,000 years ago would have been sort of a silly conversation, because labor didn't exist in the same way. It existed under codes or overcoding of kings, for example. As that breaks down, that happens alongside the breakdown of gender norms, for example, or sexuality norms. All of these codes go with it. You can't just have like, oh, we're only going to get rid of the codes of that. It's like, no, codes go away and they start breaking down. And then what does it mean to be, for example, queer? It tends to mean, generally speaking, a heteronormative existence. And I know it's saying a lot, but there's a reason we tend to talk about, mostly it's straight people, but it's also an older queer. Who's the man? Who's the woman? Who's the top? Who's the bottom? These very traditional feminine, masculine roles. We still do those. Well, those things are even breaking down at this point, and they will continue to, along with everything else. The axiomatic is this abstract machine that gets placed into the situation of the symbolic or all of this regulatory system that sort of we've been going over today. And the abstract machine comes in and is like, hey, here's a rule about how desire is going to sort of operate. It's more complex than that. I'm being overly simplistic at this point, because underneath it, this schizophrenic process is firing off. It's connecting, and desire is, and the impulses go out and they try to find things to connect with or be stimulated by or to be pushed by. And it's going to keep doing that. But the axiomatic steps in and breaks those or limits those or sets them up, which creates the clinical entity of the schizophrenic or the clinical entity of the autistic, which is more what they're talking about, that shuts people down, that breaks that sort of free connection and growth and emergence of life, and instead creates a very brutally repressed version of it. All right, Afnan, go for it. Sorry.
No, thank you. Perfect. Yeah, that just I wanted to see your take on it, and I thought, yeah,
Yay.
see whether we yeah, because I do agree with you in that exact way. I like the way that you make it simpler. I tend to take it more abstract, even in the relations between them. But I like the way you explain it more simpler. So if I understood you correctly, I would still have the I would still have the same yeah, I would still agree that in some sense, within the process of, if I would think of it, of the on the way that Greeks, for example, understood the relations between humans and God, if you recall it, then it would still within the same process of retrotalization and detrotalization, but instead of thinking of it as something that just exists within the abstract machine, but rather is the process of itself, of which reality comes into existence through the relation between the desiring flow or the flow. I don't like desiring flow, I like flow. So between the flow and the abstract machine. And that moment where it clashes, it does actually causes where they both clash, which is the schizoanalytic moment to me, as I think of it. Then at that moment exactly or specifically, we would have what so-called in some sense the universe or the world or whatever that is being captured and retotalized and decoded again, and it goes through the same process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I understood you correctly, and you still see the things you explained it.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Man, that's killing my brain. All right. But we are going to stop there. Is there any other notes or comments on this? Because I have work stuff to get to, and I have other things to sort of put together. I've got to run. Is there any other comments on these pages at this point? Because I'd love to be able to sort of close out, and then from here, make it to the next week, which is basically where they actually start making their point more affirmatively. I take that as a no. All right, excellent. Let me see where I can send you guys, because I don't have a ton of people watching, but you know what? It's enough. Let's see who's live. Surf, and then let's see. We'll send you into a less brain rotting stream like this one. This one fucking sucked. This was tough. This is like some of the harder paragraphs. So I appreciate everyone sticking through it. It's no fun, to say the least. But we'll send you off to Kid Not Ken. Give all my love to Becoming. Thursday we have our Klosowski reading group. Maybe streaming tonight. Maybe streaming tomorrow night, not quite sure. Trying to figure out what we're doing here, but it'll be one of those two. I'm not doing any more Jordan Peterson streams. I'm done with that. That's like one of the worst things I've ever watched. I can't do it anymore. So that's not happening. Sorry. But otherwise, we will be chatting soon.